No one at the Regal Grand Hotel expected history to walk through their doors in heels and a silk Chanel suit. But that's exactly what happened when Mei Lin Cheng, a wealthy Chinese entrepreneur, arrived. With antique trunks, a quiet dignity, and not a single word of English. Most of the staff dismissed her as difficult or confused. What they didn't know was that Mei Lin wasn't just a guest. She had come to reclaim a stolen legacy. Invisible to most, but not to Mei Lin, was Naomi Carter, a black housekeeper who moved silently through the hotel's polished halls. Fluent in Mandarin thanks to a childhood in Beijing, Naomi understood more than just the language. She recognized the isolation and prejudice Mei Lin faced. When Naomi returned a lost jade phoenix pendant to Mei Lin and greeted her in flawless Mandarin, the older woman's icy fade cracked. It was the first time someone had truly listened. From that moment, the two women, one ignored for her race, the other for her voice, formed an unlikely alliance. What began as a simple act of kindness would soon unravel decades of silence. Because behind the Regal's luxurious facade were secrets of stolen land, erased names, and a powerful family desperate to hide the truth. But the phoenix had returned, and justice was finally ready to rise. The jade pendant had been lying silently on the hotel carpet, delicate, radiant, shaped like a phoenix mid-flight. It could have remained there unnoticed, dismissed, like its owner had been, all day. But when Naomi Carter spotted it and gently picked it up, something deeper stirred inside her. She wasn't just holding a piece of jewelry. She was holding the thread of a forgotten story, and she wasn't going to let it go. Earlier that day, Mei Lin Cheng, a poised woman in her 52nd with streaked silver-black hair and quiet elegance, had arrived at the Regal Grand Hotel, dragging two worn leather trunks and speaking only in Mandarin. The staff had smiled politely but offered no true assistance. Her room wasn't ready. Her words were ignored, her gestures misunderstood, and when she tried to hand a traditional red envelope intended as a sign of goodwill to the concierge, it was mistaken for a bribe. No one paused long enough to ask questions. They simply assumed she was eccentric, difficult, or unimportant. But Naomi had seen it before. The subtle cruelty of indifference masked as professionalism. Naomi wasn't just any housekeeper. She had grown up in Beijing, the daughter of a cultural Bichon diplomat, fluent in Mandarin and familiar with both Chinese etiquette and American prejudice. She immediately recognized what was happening. Mei Lin wasn't confused. She was trying to be heard, and no one was listening. Later that evening, with her shift ending, Naomi approached the tearful woman sitting alone in the hotel's quiet tea lounge. Mei Lin's posture was perfect, but her eyes were heavy with exhaustion and silent grief. Naomi stepped forward and opened her palm, revealing the jade phoenix pendant. Then she spoke gently, in clear Mandarin. "Is this yours, Madam Cheng?" The transformation was immediate. Mei Lin's expression, once guarded, cracked open with disbelief, then relief. She clasped Naomi's wrist with trembling hands, her voice barely above a whisper. You speak Chinese?" From there, the words poured out. Mei Lin explained everything: her failed attempts at communication, the urgency of her trip, the weight of the documents she carried, and the legacy she had come to reclaim. She wasn't here on vacation. She was here chasing history. Naomi listened intently. Then, without hesitation, she sat beside Mei Lin, offered her help, and for the first time all day, the Chinese guest felt seen. The next morning, the dynamic within the Regal began to shift. Naomi, no longer just a housekeeper in the shadows, was now serving as Mei Lin's official interpreter and assistant. She translated her guests' requests to the stunned front desk staff, ensuring Mei Lin's needs were finally addressed with the respect they deserved. When Mr. Eaton, the polished hotel manager, asked where Naomi had learned Mandarin, she simply replied, "It wasn't on my resume, but perhaps it should have been." The moment was symbolic. For too long, Naomi had been underestimated. She had kept her head down, worked quietly, avoided office gossip. She had endured whispers, assumptions, and the unspoken rule that employees like her weren't meant to shine. But in that instant, the quiet housekeeper became the voice of a guest whose silence had been weaponized against her. Back in her suite, Mei Lin shared more with Naomi. The Jade Phoenix, she explained, was one of a pair. Its twin, a dragon pendant, had been lost decades ago when her grandmother fled New York under threat. Mei Lin had brought documents, heirlooms, and family records, in hopes of uncovering what had been stolen. Not just property, but identity. As Mei Lin laid out antique maps and letters on her hotel desk, Naomi realized she wasn't just translating language. She was helping translate a buried past into present-day truth. They pieced together records, building names and addresses, searching for evidence that Mei Lin's grandmother had once co-owned the very land the Regal now stood on. A land taken through fraud and prejudice during post-war America, when Chinese property owners were vulnerable and invisible. Each evening, the pair met quietly in the Magnolia Suite, now transformed into a command center. Maps, historical records, and photos from the 1942nd lay across every surface. And at Bellamont, the heart of it all, stood the Jade Phoenix, no longer just a lost trinket, but a symbol of resilience. Despite growing tension within the hotel, Naomi continued to serve with quiet focus. Staff whispered about her new role. Some sneered, calling her a fraud, accusing her of seeking attention. But others, like a front desk clerk named Jenna, began to reflect on how badly Mei Lin had been treated. "We were talking at her like she was a child," Jenna admitted to her co-workers one night. "Naomi's the only one who actually helped." Mei Lin noticed it too. "Everyone wants to listen now," she said one evening, "but only because they realize I might be someone powerful. You were the only one who helped me, before they knew who I was." Naomi nodded, understanding. "They saw your money. I saw your silence. In that shared silence, they forged something stronger than loyalty. A sisterhood born not of background but of purpose." Mei Lin had come to reclaim stolen history, but what she found in Naomi was something just as powerful. Someone brave enough to hear the truth and speak it when no one else would. And the truth was just beginning to surface. For years, the Regal Grand Hotel had stood as a monument to wealth, prestige, and power. But deep within its marble halls, something long buried was beginning to stir. It started with a pendant, then a conversation, then a decision. If justice was to rise, it would have to rise from within. Naomi Carter knew she was risking everything. As a housekeeper, her place was meant to be invisible. Behind the scenes, cleaning, nodding, disappearing. But after witnessing the quiet indignity that Mei Lin Chung had endured, Naomi chose to step out of the shadows. With her flawless Mandarin and unwavering sense of justice, she became more than a translator. She became an ally to a woman on a mission to reclaim what history had stolen. Mei Lin had come to New York, not just to stay at a luxury hotel, but to uncover the truth. Her grandmother, Jiang Mei, had been a Chinese art dealer and real estate investor in the 1942nd, who fled the U.S. after being betrayed by her American business partners during the post-World War II surge of anti-Asian sentiment. Mei Lin believed her family had once owned the Crotons, very land the Regal stood on. She carried with her heirlooms, handwritten maps, and a deep hunger to restore a name long erased. One night, under the quiet hum of hotel service lights, Naomi slipped back into her old uniform. Not out of shame, but for camouflage. Dressed once again as a housekeeper, she led Mei Lin to the basement, past the hum of laundry machines and the creak of forgotten doors. Their destination, the archive room. Naomi had seen it before. Always locked. Always off limits. But she knew where the keys were. Years of silent observation had taught her more than cleaning routines. Inside the archives, the scent of paper and age filled the air. Rows of file boxes, forgotten, blueprints, and records no one cared to open. For nearly an hour, the women searched, each document another thread in a larger tapestry. Then Maylin's voice cut through the silence. "Naomi, come here." Behind a false wall panel, she had uncovered a leather-bound book. Its cover was brittle, its pages yellowed, but its handwriting was unmistakable. It was Jiang Mei's journal. Page after page told a story of ambition, betrayal, and hope. Sketches of floor plans, Chinese, proverbs, and maps filled the margins. Among them was a layout of the hotel's third floor, one that didn't match the current design. A particular wing was marked Phoenix, and, beside it, the symbol of a jade pendant, one that matched the one Maylin wore. "A hidden suite," Naomi whispered. "She built something here, and they covered it up." The very next night, under cover of darkness, they searched for it. They found it behind a decorative alcove on the third floor. A narrow corridor masked by a Chinese vase and subtle misalignment in the walls. The key? The Phoenix pendant itself, which Maylin pressed into a carved impression near the baseboard. With a click and a soft creak, the panel shifted. History opened itself. What they discovered took their breath away. The Phoenix suite had not been destroyed, only sealed. Covered in dust, but untouched by time, it bore the marks of Jiang Mei's hand in every detail. Silk-covered walls, carved, rosewood screens, calligraphy scrolls, jade figurines, and most powerfully photographs. Framed family portraits of a young Jiang Mei with her business partners, including one man Naomi immediately recognized from the hotel's founding display. George Eaton Sr. The betrayal now had faces. At the heart of the room stood a small safe behind a portrait. Inside it was a letter addressed to Jiang Mei in Hong Kong, never delivered. It was from James Thompson, one of her former business partners, confessing to the fraud and including the matching dragon pendant. Other half of the pair. He had regretted his actions, but by then, it had been too late. Maylin stood silently for several moments, her hand gripping the dragon pendant. "She died, thinking she was forgotten," she said quietly. "But we found her, back in the suite. They carefully documented every artifact. Naomi used her phone to photograph everything, just in case the room was ever discovered or destroyed. But someone had already been watching." A silent red camera light blinked in the archives. And by morning, security footage of their visit was mysteriously flagged. When Naomi was summoned to Mr. Eaton's office, she knew the tone before he even spoke. His words were sharp, quiet, and cold. "You're a housekeeper, Miss Carter, not a historian. Stay in your lane." But Naomi was no longer afraid. "With respect, sir, I'm assisting a guest. That's my job." Eaton's response was swift. "You're reassigned. One more misstep, and you're out." Naomi returned to Maylin and delivered the warning. The older woman's reaction was swift. "You're not going anywhere," she said firmly. She picked up the hotel phone and issued a request in Mandarin for Naomi to be assigned exclusively to her for the remainder of her stay. "Mr." Eaton tried to resist. He brought in a professional translator. But Maylin refused to speak. A word to him. "Naomi understands me," she said. "The rest of you only pretend to." The tension rose. Other staff began whispering. Naomi was being targeted. One night, Heather, her colleague turned critic, was caught leaving Maylin's room. Something was missing. A translated note referencing the hidden suite. When Naomi confronted Heather, the truth emerged. "They paid me," Heather admitted in tears. "Said it was just research. I didn't know they were trying to erase her." To Naomi's shock, Maylin didn't respond with anger, but with compassion. "They exploited your need," she told Heather, "like they exploited my grandmother's silence. Now, you get to choose a different side." And with that, the first seeds of resistance were planted. It was no longer just about the suite or the pendants. It was about a system built on erasure. And Naomi, once a housekeeper hidden in plain sight, had become a translator of more plain than just words. She was translating history, and the phoenix, long buried in silence, was preparing to rise. The deeper they searched, the more dangerous the truth became. By the fourth day of Mei Lin Cheng's stay at the Regal Grand Hotel, the luxury facade had begun to crack. What had started as a quiet mission to uncover a buried legacy had now grown into something undeniable, something that rattled the very foundation of the hotel's history. Mei Lin and Naomi Carter, once just a guest and a housekeeper, had now uncovered tangible proof of decades-old fraud. A sealed suite, a confession letter, heirlooms untouched since 1951, and family photographs linking the Cheng lineage directly to the hotel's origins. And someone wanted it all erased. Naomi was the first to notice the shift. After a sleepless night cataloging artifacts in the Phoenix wing, she returned to Mei Lin's suite to find the door ajar. Inside, chaos. Antique. Trunks overturned. Personal documents scattered. Priceless silks trampled on the floor. Most damning of all, James Thompson's confession letter was missing. Security claimed the footage had been lost in a system error. The night guard, who had helped disable cameras for their third-floor search, was suddenly let go. When Naomi confronted Mr. Eaton, his usual smug civility had hardened into threat. "You're playing with fire, Miss Carter," he said, voice low. "You don't understand the history you're trying to rewrite." But Naomi did understand, and so did Mei Lin. The break-in hadn't been a burglary. It was a warning, a message from the hotel's silent gatekeepers. Stop digging, or disappear. Yet instead of retreating, Mei Lin pressed forward. That same morning, she reached out to Amanda Chun at the Chinatown Historical Society, a historian who had spent decades documenting cases just like hers. Amanda listened to Mei Lin's story without interruption, only nodding occasionally, as if pieces she'd long suspected were finally snapping into place. "You're not alone," Amanda said. "There are dozens of families who lost everything between 1942 and 1955. But you're the first to bring undeniable evidence." Naomi watched as a kind of transformation occurred. Mei Lin, once cloaked in polite reserve, now moved with steel in her spine. Her voice was calm, but her words hit like stone. "They erased my grandmother from the official history. I won't let them erase me." Still, the threat loomed closer. Two guests checked into the suite across the hall. A man and a woman claiming to be luxury travel journalists. Naomi, always alert, noticed their eyes followed her too closely. Their questions were too specific. Their interest in Mei Lin was too pointed. One morning, Naomi caught the man whispering with a staff member near the service elevator. The name Phillips floated through the air, and her blood ran cold. Warren Phillips was one of the original 3 men who had stolen Jiang Mei's land and shares. If this man was his grandson, then the old guard wasn't just watching, they were mobilizing. Mei Lin confirmed Naomi's fears. "He's not just observing," she said. "He's here to discredit me, or worse, silence me. That letter they stole, it's not the only copy, but it's enough to stall my claim if we don't act fast." The time for secrecy had ended. Amanda Chun arranged a meeting with Sarah Winters, a well-respected investigative journalist for the New York Tribune. Known for her no-nonsense reporting on corporate corruption, Sarah listened intently as Mei Lin and Naomi laid out their case. They showed her everything. The pendant, the journal, the hidden suite, the appraisal documents, and digital backups of the missing letter. "This is more than just a legal claim," Sarah said, her pen racing across the page. "This is systemic theft, historical erasure. If we go public with this, the backlash will be enormous." "That's the point," Mei Lin said. They've hidden behind polite racism and polished lobbies for 70 years. It's time the world sees what they really built this empire on. Sarah agreed to publish, but insisted on verifying everything herself. You'll be protected, she promised. We'll make this too big for them to bury. But before the ink could even dry, Regal's leadership began to panic. Mr. Eaton called an emergency board meeting. Executives and legal advisors flooded into the hotel, holding closed-door sessions, scrambling to get ahead of the storm. Staff were interrogated. Security was doubled, and those suspected of siding with Mei Lin Naomi, included, were quietly removed from internal communications. Naomi's keycard stopped working. Her access to employee databases was revoked. Her email vanished. They're erasing you, Mei Lin said grimly, handing Naomi a burner phone. Just like they erased my grandmother. But they weren't fast enough. 3 days later, the New York Tribune broke the story. Hotel empire built on stolen Chinese land. The expose was brutal, detailed, and irrefutable. It included testimonies, historical records, and photographic evidence. The Phoenix Wing, the pendant, the journal, the letter from James Thompson. Expert analysis from Dr. Wallace confirmed the antiques had remained untouched since 1951. The public response was explosive. Protests erupted outside the Regal. Social media flooded with outrage. Influencers canceled bookings. Celebrities voiced support. Asian American advocacy groups called for formal investigations into post-war property theft. A class-action lawsuit began to form. Within 24 hours, Mr. Eaton's composure shattered. He fired 3 more staff members, including Heather claiming security breaches. He threatened legal action against any employee who spoke to the press, but the damage was done. Inside the Regal, loyalty fractured. Some employees resigned in solidarity with Naomi. Others, once indifferent, quietly apologized. The cultural rot had been exposed, and no amount of PR spin could reverse it. Mei Lin remained composed through it all. She refused all interview requests. She stayed in her suite, documenting, preserving, waiting. Naomi, now locked out of her job, stood by her side, no longer just a housekeeper, but a witness, a translator of truth. What happens now? She asked one evening, as chants from the protests echoed up to the 14th floor. Mei Lin looked out the window, the city's skyline reflecting in her eyes. Now, she said, we make them answer for 70 years of silence. The black car pulled up to the curb, cutting through the crowd of protesters like a blade, through silk. Mei Lin Cheng stepped out first, her crisp white suit, a deliberate statement, not of wealth, but of war. She moved with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to prove and everything to reclaim. At her side, Naomi Carter wore a simple navy dress, but her presence spoke volumes. No longer a housekeeper or translator, she was a witness, an equal, and a co-author of this final chapter. As the 2 women crossed the gleaming threshold of the Regal Grand Hotel, the mood shifted, palpably. Staff who once ignored Mei Lin now froze mid-task. Guests whispered. Security. Guards fidgeted. And at the front desk, Rebecca, once so dismissive, stammered as she confirmed. Yes, Miss Cheng, the board is expecting you. The Vermilion Room is ready. The Vermilion Room, named for its blood-red walls and its history of hosting only the most powerful figures in the hotel's legacy, now bore witness to a different kind of meeting, one that would redefine that legacy forever. 9 board members sat around a polished mahogany table. At the head of the table, the chair, usually reserved for General Manager Richard Eaton, sat empty. His absence was not an oversight. It was an omen. I'm Bradford Wells, said the silver-haired chairman. We appreciate you coming, Miss Cheng. Please, have a seat. I'll stand. Mei Lin replied calmly. My associate, Miss Naomi Carter, will remain with me. A few board members murmured in protest. One woman, severe and sharp-eyed, objected. "This is a private session. Staff shouldn't be present." "She's no longer your staff," Mei Lin said, her tone even. "She's my legal assistant. And my witness. If she leaves, I leave. And so does the press packet that's scheduled to go live in 20 minutes. The room went silent. Wells relented. "Very well. Proceed." Mei Lin laid her evidence on the table one by one like cards in a game no one else knew. They'd already lost. A notarized letter from James Thompson. Photographs of the hidden Phoenix Wing. Deeds bearing her grandmother Jiang Mei's name. And finally, the matched jade pendants, Phoenix and Dragon, restored after decades of separation. "This hotel was built on land stolen from my family," she said. "Forged signatures, intimidation, a campaign of fear that forced my grandmother to flee this country. You now profit from her erasure." Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others looked unmoved. "We understand your grievance," Wells began, "but most of us weren't even born when this happened. Why punish the present for the sins of the past?" "Because you've benefited from those sins," Naomi said firmly. "And until you acknowledge that, you're still complicit." Just then, the doors burst open. Richard Eaton stormed in, his face flushed with rage. "This is a circus," he barked. "You can't seriously be considering legitimizing this woman's claims. She's manipulated the media, bribed our staff, and now she's holding us hostage." "You've been relieved of your duties, Mr. Eaton," Wells reminded him coldly. "I built this brand," Eaton shouted, "and now you want to hand it over to a woman with a pendant and a grudge." "No," Mei Lin said quietly. "You built nothing. Your grandfather stole it. And now, I'm simply here to restore what was taken." Without breaking eye contact, she pulled out one last document, an independent forensic analysis confirming that the signatures on the 1,951 transfer deeds had been forged. "That's modern science," Naomi added, "which makes your argument obsolete." And then came the final blow. From the back of the room, an elderly Chinese woman stepped forward. Grace Wang, a retired schoolteacher. She had been 10 years old when Jiang Mei gave her family housing, after they were evicted for being Chinese. "I remember her," Grace said. "She helped us when no one else would. And then she disappeared. Everyone in our neighborhood knew why. We just didn't have the power to stop it." She looked each board member in the eye, her voice unwavering. "But you do." The room fell into an eerie stillness. Wells turned to the board. "It's time we vote." One by one, the hands rose. 6 in favor, 3 opposed. "The board formally recognizes Miss Cheng's claim," Wells announced. "Effective immediately, she will be awarded a 25% ownership stake in the Regal Grand Hotel, and her grandmother's name will be restored in the official history." Eaton's chair squeaked as he stood, stunned. "You're giving away our legacy." "No," Wells replied quietly. "We're giving it back." As the board dispersed, cameras captured the historic moment. Mei Lin exited the Vermilion room not as a guest, but as an owner. Naomi walked beside her, no longer in uniform, no longer invisible. The Phoenix had risen, and the city would never look at the Regal Hotel the same way again. In the days that followed, legal paperwork was finalized. The Phoenix Wing was restored and opened to the public as a cultural heritage site. Jiang Mei's portrait hung proudly above the fireplace, now accompanied by a plaque that read, "Founding investor and visionary designer, 1938到1951." And one afternoon, as Naomi stood in the newly renamed Phoenix Room, she overheard a guest reading the plaque aloud and whispering, "I had no idea this place had such a story." She smiled. Now they would. 2 months after the historic boardroom showdown, the Regal Grand Hotel no longer looked or felt like the same place. On the surface, the marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, and the lobby's grand piano still played softly in the background. But under the surface, Something deeper had changed. The silence that once erased history had been replaced by stories finally being told and honored. Mei Lin Cheng, now officially a 25% owner and the cultural heritage trustee of the hotel, moved through the halls with quiet authority. No longer a dismissed guest struggling to communicate. She was now the architect of a reimagined vision, one that her grandmother, Jiang Mei, had first dreamed of in 1938. Beside her stood Naomi Carter, former housekeeper, now officially appointed as the Regal's cultural liaison and assistant to the newly formed Heritage Preservation Board. Naomi's responsibilities extended far beyond translation. She was helping design the new training, curriculum for staff, overseeing cultural exhibitions, and most importantly, bridging the gap between the hotel's past sins and its future promise. The irony, Mei Lin said one morning as they stood in the newly restored Phoenix Wing, is that my grandmother wanted this hotel to be a bridge between East and West. But by erasing her, they severed the bridge. Now we're rebuilding it. And rebuild they did. The hotel launched a series of internal reforms, starting with its staff. Cultural sensitivity, training became mandatory. Hiring shifted to focus on language, diversity, intercultural knowledge, and lived experience. Old biases were no longer ignored. They were confronted directly. Some staff members resisted the change and quietly resigned. Others, like Heather, Naomi's former colleague, surprised everyone by returning with humility and a desire to grow. I didn't understand what you were doing, Heather told Naomi one day. But I see it now. You weren't climbing a ladder, you were pulling down a curtain. In the lobby, a new historical exhibit had been installed. Framed letters, photographs, and heirlooms from the hidden Phoenix Wing were now displayed behind crystal glass, including the twin jade pendants, the phoenix and the dragon. At the center stood a black and white photograph of Jiang Mei, poised and radiant, standing beside her original business partners. Before the betrayal, each afternoon at 4 o'clock, guests gathered in the Phoenix Room for a new tradition. The bridge ceremony, co-hosted by Naomi and Mei Lin. The event blended the Chinese tea ceremony with Western hospitality rituals. Guests learned the cultural significance behind each movement, heard stories about Jiang Mei's vision, and left with more than souvenirs. They left with understanding. This isn't about performance, Mei Lin had insisted when designing the ritual. It's about presence, not just sipping tea, but seeing one another. The public responded with overwhelming support. Bookings increased, especially among international travelers and cultural heritage enthusiasts. Travel bloggers dubbed the Regal America's first truly cross-cultural luxury hotel. The New York Times ran a headline, "From one www.com. Erasure to empowerment. The Phoenix rises at the Regal." Behind the scenes, Mei Lin was working on something even bigger. The Jiang Cultural Heritage Foundation. Launched in the hotel's grand ballroom, the foundation aimed to research and expose other cases of property theft and cultural erasure committed against immigrant families throughout U.S. history. This isn't just about my grandmother, Mei Lin said at the launch ceremony. This is about every family who was silenced, every legacy rewritten. We cannot change the past, but we can honor the truth and shape what comes next. The foundation would offer legal aid, grant funding, and research fellowships to descendants of historically displaced families. In partnership with the Chinatown Historical Society, universities across the country, the program was already receiving dozens of inquiries each week. Naomi stood at the side of the stage, watching her mentor speak to a packed ballroom of journalists, historians, and former guests. For a moment, she couldn't help but reflect. A few months ago, she had been organizing towels, scrubbing floors, and avoiding eye contact with the guests who looked through her. Now, she was speaking at panels, advising restoration architects, and co-writing policy briefs. It hadn't been easy. There were still whispers in the staff corridors. Some called her lucky, others a traitor. But Naomi had learned something Mei Lin had known for decades. The truth doesn't need everyone to believe it. It only needs to be spoken out loud. That evening, as the hotel quieted and the city lights glowed beyond the tall windows, Naomi returned to the Phoenix Wing. It had become her favorite space, not just because of its beauty, but because of its honesty. The walls whispered the story of a woman who refused to stay invisible. And now, thanks to Mei Lin, they would whisper that story forever. On one wall, a newly installed plaque read, "In memory of Jiang Mei, visionary, immigrant, architect of unity. May her story rise like the phoenix again and again." Naomi touched the edge of the plaque, then reached for the phoenix pendant she now wore, a gift from Mei Lin. She hadn't expected to be given the heirloom. "You helped it rise again," Mei Lin had told her simply. "Now it's yours." From across the street, someone watched. Michael Lee, the fake journalist and grandson of Warren Phillips, sat in the back of a black SUV, observing the flow of guests in and out of the Regal. His face was unreadable, but his phone was pressed tightly to his ear. "We underestimated them," he said. "The damage is contained to this hotel for now. But if they start looking into the other properties." A pause, a nod. "Understood. We'll wait and watch." Inside the Phoenix room, Naomi had no idea that the fight for historical justice had only just begun. But she didn't feel fear. She felt something stronger, conviction. As she turned off the lights and left the restored suite behind her, Naomi whispered the words she and Mei Lin had said so often. They'd become a mantra. Your story wasn't lost. It was just waiting for someone to hear it. No one expected the transformation. Not even Naomi Carter herself. Once dismissed as a quiet housekeeper, Naomi had spent years walking unseen through the gilded halls of the Regal Grand Hotel. But when she found a jade phoenix pendant on the raid floor and chose to return it in perfect Mandarin to a woman no one had tried to understand, everything changed. That woman was Mei Lin Cheng, a Chinese millionaire on a mission to uncover a truth that had been buried for 70 years. What started as a simple act of translation soon unraveled: hidden legacy, stolen land, a sealed suite, and a family's erasure from history. Together, Naomi and Mei Lin stood against a system built to silence them, and together they reclaimed not just property, but dignity, voice, and belonging. By the time the Phoenix Wing reopened to the world, Naomi was no longer just a housekeeper. She was the bridge between past and justice, silence and truth. Sometimes, the most powerful revolutions begin not with anger, but with empathy. Naomi didn't fight for attention. She listened, she acted, and she honored another woman's pain. And in doing so, she changed not only a hotel, but a legacy. Let this story remind us: justice begins when we choose to see the invisible and stand beside them. Like stories that awaken truth and dignity, leave a comment. What does justice mean to you? Subscribe for more powerful narratives that prove when we listen deeply, healing begins.